Welcome to Spiritual Naturalism Today, a conversation on science, nature, and spirituality. Our program is sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society with host Daniel Strain.
Hello, and thank you for listening. I'm Daniel Strain, and this is my co-host, B.T. Newberg.
Hello.
And co-host, Lee Anderson.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking about building a spiritual practice. And that includes a lot of different things. What does it mean to have one? What is it for? How to build it? Getting into it? Building good habits? Sharing from and learning from one another? And just about everything about that process. So we kind of jumped into this today because we wanted to discuss between each other and let you guys hear our discussion about the topic itself. Do you guys have any questions about what our topic is today, BT or Lee?
Well, what is our topic here exactly? Okay, so yeah, that's the first question. What do we mean by practice, right? If I can jump in, the way I see it.
Sure.
I interpret practice, we're talking about this in the context of spirituality, right? But in naturalistic spirituality, I interpret practice in the least spiritual way I can think of. The most mundane way you can think of. Like, practice makes perfect kind of practice. That's the kind of practice that I'm thinking of. But what you're making perfect are mental habits. It's things that you do over and over again to train your mental habits in new ways that are conducive to personal growth of some kind.
Okay. I think that's fair. What about you, Lee? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what BT says. And from my perspective, too, the practice can also include, your background in other areas such as Buddhism or paganism or something like that. But practice for us is how we incorporate the spiritual naturalist concepts into our own spiritual practice.
Yeah, that's a good point, too, because if we import the term from Buddhism, they often talk about their Buddhist practice, and it's a more like holistic, integrated thing. So there's really kind of two levels that we can define it on. Where I was talking about was specific individual exercises, and it sounded like, Lee, what you meant was kind of more the like overall like your life stance and how you integrate your ideas into actual daily living. Is that right?
Exactly, and it's going to be different for each of us because we don't have one consistent way, that we all perceive even the word practice as it is or what we do.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like a very holistic kind of thing throughout, but at the same time, there are these specific practices, whether it's walking meditation is a specific practice, or I don't know. We could name a lot of different ones, but
well, we probably should actually. Let's get some good
examples.
examples.
Absolutely.
So meditation, right, is a good one.
That's the easy first one that comes off the top of your head,
Yeah.
Right.
But it also doesn't have to be all that spiritual sounding either. I mean, running can be a practice in the sense that we're talking about. I would consider it that if you're doing it as a means of sort of cultivating your mental state, like sort of cultivating discipline, cultivating endurance, and perseverance, things like that. Or sometimes I've even run sometimes in a way where I try to keep my thoughts just on like what's ahead of me and not any other interfering thoughts. So it's kind of halfway between like a regular exercise run and like a walking meditation, or in this case, a running meditation.
Yeah, sometimes it's like it can also be like trying to cultivate a certain perspective. You can enunciate a perspective in words, but trying to really picture or see things from a certain point of view and trying to internalize that Sometimes that can be done by listening to music. So music can be, of course, a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Various rituals that people do. When I go to the Buddhist temple, I bow when I come into the room. That's a ritual, but I have a reason for doing that. It helps me in that moment in time to focus my attention. And so I think some of the practices are geared toward developing a long-term thing, cultivating compassion or empathy. Others are geared toward getting into the right frame of mind or the right kind of disposition for what you're about to do, maybe some other set of practices.
Right.
And then some practices I call integrated practices are just a kind of thing that you really integrate throughout your day, like how you carry yourself. Well, we talked about demeanor practice in that one episode. So
yes. I was thinking about normal things that people do, like photography. And these days, people are big on taking their selfies and things like that. But you can also specifically do contemplative photography, where you're going out and you're looking for, those spiritual aspects that you're seeing through your camera, like that too.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, things like that, like we're keeping a gratitude journal or just any kind of journal.
Yes.
Or even just talking to a friend. I have a friend that we have a once a week email exchange about what's going on in our lives, and more than just kind of like gossip and chat. It's kind of like, what are you dealing with kind of emotionally that week, and that's very much part of my practice.
Yeah, a friend of mine, I say friend, but she's really more of an acquaintance. It's someone that my wife and I met a long time ago. She lives in another city, but now we know her on Facebook, so we're Facebook friends, but we see her posts and everything, and she has various kinds of spiritual practices that she writes about in her blog and all this, very interesting stuff. And one day she posted to her local friends, asking them to come over and share sacred space and drink tea and have conversation. And it was really just it's like a social time, but the way that she framed it and the way that it was about, it was a very, a really cool thing. And I thought, man, that would be really fun to do with my friends. And, so you can have these communal practices. I like drum circles a lot. And so drum circle, and I don't get to participate in them as often as I wish I could, but that's an example too of a communal practice. But it's also helpful, I think, to note that any one of these activities, whether it's running or photography, like you said, or any of these kinds of things, socializing, music, and even, yes, sitting there with your eyes closed, any of those things can be not a spiritual practice. They can be just being done for some kind of surface reasons or mundane reasons or just pure entertainment or whatever. So it very much is about the mindset and the approach of it. And then there's these things
So hold on there though. So what then is spiritual about it?
Yeah, let's take the example.
What do we mean by spiritual for listeners who haven't maybe heard us before?
That's right. So let's take, for example, the running. I got the impression, and photography even, in your case, Lee, I got the impression when both of you were talking about that, you're talking about something other than just you went outside your house and ran, or you went outside your house and started taking pictures of things. There's something else going on in there, and that is the subjective internal state and the disposition from which you're doing the thing. That so much matters. If you come into a room and you bow, well, if you're doing that because there's some person who's going to judge you whether or not you bowed because it's considered etiquette, and that's one thing. If you do it in another state of mind, that's another thing. So really, all of these things are about what effect is it having on you, on your psyche, on your mental habits, like you said, BT. And
So it's about growth.
Yeah, I would think so. About growth, development, moving toward being a different kind of person that you choose to be, that you're working on things about yourself.
Yeah, so from a naturalistic perspective, I tend to interpret spirituality as being connected to sense of meaning, a sense of connection with other people and with your environment and the world, and with a sense of personal growth. Those are kind of like the big things for me in terms of what spirituality means when we talk about it from a naturalistic point of view.
I think it also includes a purpose. You're doing it purposefully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And it also, I think if you imagine a person who does not have a spiritual practice in the sense that we mean it, that might be a person who they go to work, their mind is occupied by the things of work. At the end of work, they're driving home, complaining about the traffic, whatever, maybe listening to some music and enjoying the music on the radio. They get home, they see their kids, they might really enjoy seeing their kids and have a good time, or they might have a bad time that evening, whatever. They do dinner, they watch TV. When it's time to go to bed, they go to bed. And all of these things are happening, and there's good feelings in there and bad feelings in there. And all of these things are developing you in some way. They're shaping you as you go through life. The question is, are you engaging in time and space and activities at certain points where you are consciously engaging in them for the purpose of developing yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the purpose that Lee was talking about.
Yeah.
And intentionality.
Intentionality, right. Because you're going to be shaped in some direction. If there's no intentionality, then you will develop along some line.
Right.
The question is, are you going to end up being the kind of person you want to be and have the kind of life you want to have?
Right.
Awareness.
I think awareness is big, because otherwise those things that you're doing, even if you meditate and you run and everything, they're basically just habits,
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that you subscribe to, the idea that you have a goal of where you want to be as a person, and you have certain beliefs about the universe and how it works, and how come that's not enough to get where you want to go? I mean, let's say you've decided what your opinions are on the supernatural. We as naturalists are like, yeah, not so much. So you've kind of got all your beliefs squared away. So are we good? Is that going to get us where we want to go? What do we need to do?
Well, there's a lot of things to believe about reality that are without going into the supernatural. There's a lot of different kinds of things about reality we might believe or focus on, such as the interconnectedness of everyone and the connectedness of my happiness to your happiness. Those are things that are all part of the universe, and we can choose to focus on those or not. But once we focus on them, or once we decide, this is what I believe or whatever, to me it's very much about the difference between a person who has been told something and a person who has lived it. And the living through something, obviously, the more experience you get in life, the wiser you tend to get about at least that thing. And experiencing it firsthand, to me, the reason of just having your opinion about the world isn't enough is because you're just enunciating thoughts and opinions. It's all intellectual in a way. It's just you're making statements about things. But do those things really shape how you behave and how you think? More importantly, how you respond to the world moment to moment. Like, we all know it's not helpful to get angry and insult our friends or family. Then we got to go back and apologize and stuff like that. So why did we have to go back and apologize? Where was that person who apologized a few minutes ago when they were doing the thing they're apologizing for? That person was absent.
Right.
So if we can take that knowledge of I shouldn't be doing this or I should be doing this other thing and have it be integrated into our character, integrated into our personality naturally and deeply, that's what the practice is about. That's the mental habit. It's more than just, I believe that, we're all interconnected. Okay, that sounds wonderful, but do I actually operate as a being that lives in an interconnected universe naturally? When things happen, do I naturally respond in that way? Or do I have to constantly remind myself and then readjust myself?
Yeah, exactly. And how do you move from that one person to the other person? From the person who is like, well, this is what I would do, to the person who is like, this is what I actually do in a situation, right? Living according to your beliefs. How do you move from that? And I think the answer we're looking for is, practice. Practice
Right.
is what we need in order to do that,
Right.
right? Because we need to retrain our mental habits. That's the thing, is we've got habits. And a belief that you have is very much like, very much on the tip top of your cranium there, but there's so much more below. And in the SNS course that we have on offer at the Society, the way that I explain it is in terms of psychological theory about how the mind works, called dual process theory, where there's system one that's kind of like the kind of mental reasoning that you think of when you actually hear yourself reasoning something through in your head, kind of a conscious thinking. But the other one is the kind of reasoning that your mind does unconsciously. Like, for example, to figure out where to put your hand in order to catch a ball, you don't think about it, but somewhere in your mind has reasoned out where to put your hand. And there's so much that we take for granted that our mind just does without us even realizing, that is down on that deeper level called System 2. And that you want to be able to find a way to retrain your System 2 habits. And it's not enough just to change your beliefs with System 1. So what we need to do is we need to have the individual practices, the trainings, in order to try to do that. And then if we do that enough, then it becomes new habits that just flow out of us without us having to think about it. And then that's where all of it kind of comes together as sort of a holistic life path to the other kind of practice that we're talking about, like, well, this is how I live my life. This is my practice. So that's kind of how I see the big picture of it coming together.
And that's where the spiritual growth comes also, because you have to always be growing. Otherwise, you're stagnant. If you have your beliefs and everything, but if you're not always looking to, at more information, more intelligence, etc., like that, that's how you get the spiritual growth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a growth of changing from one set of habits to another.
It takes a lot of patience and a lot of diligence, because there's a lot of repetitiveness in it. A lot of times where we'll stumble, and we got to just keep and build
Right.
the habit.
Which is itself a practice where you're training the habit of forgiving yourself.
Another part of the practice, at least for spiritual naturalists, I think, is the building of the practice. So if you're part of a very traditional kind of religion or what have you, you're kind of handed the whole thing all at once. Here's what you do. You go to church and you pray, or you go to temple and you meditate, or you do this or you do that. And you read these things. Here's what you read. And okay, that informs me the perspectives, and then I do the practice. But with a spiritual naturalist, we are, we can vary. We can say, well, I'm a naturalistic Buddhist, or I'm a naturalistic pagan. And so you kind of like concentrate on those things. Or you can be somewhat eclectic. You can take bits and pieces from where you feel that you have a connection, either because of your personality or your background. There's certain things that draw you toward certain practices. It's also nice, by the way, to get out of your comfort zone. try some different things that you wouldn't necessarily have imagined you might like or find useful.
Mm-hmm.
But in that building, that to me, there's a lot of wondrous exploration that can go on there, because everything we're talking about, of course, can be found in Buddhism. It can be found in Taoism. It can be found in a lot of different traditions, bits and pieces of it, and not just bits and pieces, but very elaborate systems that are very detailed, and you can go very far down the rabbit hole exploring these things. If you are a naturalist and you have pretty sound ideas about a humble approach to knowledge, which we've talked about before, sound ideas about a healthy skepticism and making sure that you're not taking claims at face value about the world, but you can navigate those things and you can say, well, this looks like something I can put into practice and try out and see how it works for me. So that experimentation, I think, is a fun and exciting part.
Yeah,
I agree. It was Stephen Batchelor mentioned last week the religious checklist, and we don't have a specific checklist, but we can pull bits and pieces, that fit in within our naturalistic framework for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, why don't we talk a little bit about our own personal practice and see practice both in the big sense and in the smaller sense, and kind of compare and contrast and share. Do you want to go first, BT?
Sure. Okay. So my practice I switch it up a little bit every now and then. So I'll just talk about my current practice. And I keep it going for, kind of months on end. So one is, I meditate for at least 20 minutes every day. And the kind of meditation that I do is more or less a breath meditation, modeled after the Vipassana Buddhist kind of style. But with a little bit of difference than normal. Normally you try to focus as much as possible on the sensations of the breath as it goes in and out of your nose, in order that you can practice focusing your mind and any thoughts or feelings or other distractions that come up, you set them aside and go back to the sensations of the breath. So you're also practicing not letting your mind get distracted. And that's kind of how I do it, but I try to pay as little attention as possible to the breath, like just barely on the breath, with the intention that if I do that, then a lot more thoughts and feelings and other things will arise in my mind, and I'll have a lot more opportunities to practice noticing what's going on in my mind, because I think that's what's really helpful as you go through life. It's not being able to focus on the sensations of your breath going in and out. That's a means to an end. What's really helpful is just to notice when you have a feeling. When you're talking to somebody and you start to get a little bit angry, you want to notice that at the earliest possible moment. You don't want your friend to say, "Why are you getting angry?" And you're like, "I'm not getting angry, I'm not getting angry." Yeah. So you want to be able to notice those things right away, if possible. And it's hard. It's hard. That's why we need to practice it. That's why we need to train. So that's one thing. It's meditation. Another thing I've already mentioned is a weekly check-in with one of my friends over email. And we've been doing this for over a year now. It was a year last May. Couldn't believe it, because it's something we look forward to now. It's pretty cool. So we help each other through problems, kind of, what we're working on that week in terms of personal growth, etc. And I suppose in a sort of informal way, I also consider it a part of my practice to pay attention to how I'm relating to my wife, and to make sure that I'm doing as much as I can to promote a healthy relationship rather than an unhealthy one. For example, I had often noticed that when she would come home, I'd be in the middle of doing something, I'd be concentrated on it, and I would feel her kind of coming in a little bit as a distraction. and get a little bit of annoyed, but that's not fair to her. So now what I do is I very consciously, when she comes in, I finish up what I'm doing, and then I close the laptop and I move to a different chair, and then give her my full attention until we've kind of, had our little time together, and then I can go back to do what I was doing. But, bringing some kind of intentionality to a healthy relationship, too, is a pretty important part of life for me.
That's great. That's great. And so, meditation, weekly check-in with friends, interaction with our loved ones.
Exactly.
So you've got a bit of attention practice, a bit of compassion, empathy going on, and a bit of probably learning and thoughtfulness being exchanged there with the weekly check-in. Those are neat mixtures. What about you, Lee? What do you kind of look to as the things that you use to cultivate yourself?
Yeah, as my practice. Daily, I'm one of those people, I get up in the morning and I do morning pages, and I've done those for probably over 10 years or so. I've just recently read some...
What is that?
Morning pages is supposed to be, you get up in the morning, and the very first thing before you do anything else, you handwrite 3 pages of just what's in your mind, and you get it out, on a page. The time that it's supposed to take is 20 to 30 minutes, and I write really slow, so I only get 2 pages in within that. I was only getting 2 pages in, but recently I read that you're supposed to write as fast as you can in order for your hand to keep up with your brain. You're not supposed to think about what you're writing, which I kind of think is what I had been doing. So it's only been a week. I've been writing as fast as I can in the morning, and I'm seeing a big difference, and I'm getting out just, all that stuff to where suddenly I'll get to maybe the last half of the last page and I can't think of anything. And that's where you're supposed to be with that, So I do that first before I meditate, because I think I'm probably ADHD and I get distracted really easily when I meditate. So that helps, in that perspective. And then I sit down and, I meditate, and I do 10 to 15 minutes of meditation per day. I do, if I'm feeling like I can concentrate, I do the breath meditation and concentrate on my breath. If not, I'll put on headphones and do a guided meditation, and that works fine for me too. And then at night, before I go to bed, I do a gratitude journal where I just list the 5 things that I'm grateful for, during the day. And I really try hard not to repeat things, to really think of, individual things that happen during the day that I'm grateful for. And so those are the daily habits that I have. And during the week, I try to walk a few times and do kind of mindful walking. And since I live out in nature, it's easy enough for me to just get up and walk out around here for 20 to 30 minutes.
That's really cool. I had never heard of the
morning pages.
No, I think it's...
Julia Cameron is the author, and she wrote a book called The Artist Way, and it's basically for... What she wrote it for was for people who are creative, but, they sit down, and I guess it's like writer's block or something like that. This helps get out all those mundane thoughts, out of your head when you get up.
I find it especially interesting because, there's a fantastically large segment of the population that, for as much as we talk about meditation, it's not for everybody and it's not going to be for them. But that's one possible alternative where you're cultivating a very similar kind of habit, which is paying attention to what's in your mind. But instead of having to kind of sit down on a cushion or do some kind of traditional Buddhist looking thing or something, you're writing it out.
Yeah,
right.
That's really great. As an artist, I'm especially interested in that. I think I'm going to start trying that. I'm going to read a little bit about it too. That's really great. Thank you.
You should read the book.
Okay. So you do the morning pages, meditate, sometimes various types, gratitude journal. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. For myself, I do meditation. Some of these are things that I do regularly. Some of them are things I try to do regularly, but I kind of phase in and out of the good habit of it or the bad habit of it, and then I try to get back into shape again with it. And then some are these things that are just occasional, that are supposed to be occasional. Like, for example, meditative art. I decided a while back, I've been an artist my whole life, come from a family of artists, and at some point, let's see, okay, so I went to school and got my degree in fine art, and then, of course, it's hard to make a living with painting, sculpture, that kind of stuff, so I ended up getting into graphic art at work, and eventually I got to this point where I never felt like doing art because I was doing graphic art all day, so I got out of that profession, kind of migrated out of it, and even after that, I still wasn't fully satisfied until I decided a couple of years ago that from now on I would only do art when the muses gave me permission. When the muses told me it was time to do art, then I would do art. So I'd have to feel the proper motivation and feel like, and it's totally different when you're in that zone. You know what I mean? The actual what I produce is I'm so much happier with. But so that means that I don't do art now for profit or for, and not that there's anything wrong with that for people that do. It's just for me, I decided I would just keep it strictly in that kind of only when I feel that movement. So when I do, I try to meditate. Usually the subject matter now is a lot more kind of, I guess you'd call it spiritual art or whatever. And the mode that I try to get into as I do the art is a kind of a meditative state. It allows me to do a lot more intricate, long-term kinds of works that you normally would get really impatient with. So I guess it's a kind of meditation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, just, your very standard breathing meditation. I try to do 15 minutes of that a day. And I thought that was really interesting what you said, BT, about the way that you do it by focusing as little on the breath as you could so you could see what it arose. I actually believe in, for myself, I like to really intensify that focus and try to get really good at focusing on a really boring thing. Mm-hmm. Because it's usually the boring things, by boring I mean the repetitive, always there, that we most have to appreciate and to really have an enjoyable life, and we tend to overlook them. So maintaining that constant mindfulness and constant state of awareness is what I've tried to develop. And there's all kinds of different ways to do the meditation. They're all legitimate, and I think what you described is really great for exploring what's going on below and, like you said, being aware of it as it rises. And I've been focusing more on developing the ability to stay focused without your mind jumping all over the place. So that's totally, there's all kinds of, your mind is a gymnasium, and there's all kinds of different things in the gymnasium that work out different muscles. So that's all legitimate. It's all wonderful. That's what I do. And then I also do some yoga from time to time, not as much as my wife says I should, but I just for health flexibility reasons, but when I do it, this is an example of what we were talking about earlier. When I do it, I try to also, involve my mind in a way. And to me, reading is an important part of my practice. And by reading, I don't mean reading Facebook wall or whatever. I mean, or, I try to, come up with a book or some kind of, it could be scriptures from something. It could be old stuff. It could be new stuff, but stuff that has to do with all the stuff we've been talking about.
Right.
A little bit of learning about that, and try to set aside some time for that. And journaling is one of those things that I kind of phase into and out of. I'll do it for a while, kind of get me in order, and then I'll stop for a while, and then I feel like I need to do it again. But when I'm journaling, I do kind of a Seneca-style Stoic journaling. And that's kind of a thing where you examine how you did that day, and then you also write about what you plan to do tomorrow to be better, and that sort of thing. I really like your gratitude journal that you do, though. I should try to mix in some things. I meant to mention before, I've also started capping my mindfulness meditation with loving kindness meditation at the beginning and end, because I wanted to kind of balance out that non-attachment with some compassion aspect. Let's see, what else? And then things that go throughout the day. Demeanor practice, we talked about in another episode. Maintaining a compassionate demeanor and a state of mind. And also an empathy awareness kind of thing. I wrote an article about harvesting happiness, which talks about trying to empathize with other people around you and be happy about their happiness and the things happening for them. I try to do little thought experiments throughout the day as I'm observing people, and so that's basically what I most do. And so I think we're coming pretty close to the end of our time. Hopefully the people listening we've given them something to think about and something exciting to look into.
Yeah, and I think the real life examples, more than anything, probably a really good lesson, I guess, because any individual practice is going to be for some people and not for other people.
Sure.
It's going to appeal to different personalities and the amount of energy that you feel on the average. And so, yeah, not everybody's a meditator. Not everybody is into ritual. Not everybody's into running. But something like that is going to hit. And also just to note that a lot of this stuff is also now being looked into by scientific studies and things, and a lot of them are finding pretty good evidential backing behind them. The gratitude journal has gotten some pretty decent scientific evidence showing that it does increase happiness and increase gratitude. Exercise, mindfulness, meditation is getting to be a big one. Compassion meditation is also being found to be pretty useful. So yeah, we're not just relying on tradition here or extrapolating from tradition. Like there's some pretty good science going on this stuff now.
Yeah, that's really exciting to see. I think a spiritual naturalist approach is to take that and be open to it, and maybe even consider it a wonderful source of continued inspiration in informing our practice so that we become even more effective with how we're doing things. Then also what we're doing here, not just in this podcast, but in the society and in people who participate in their local organizations. The Sangha, as the Buddhists put it, the spiritual community, I think is an important thing. This is really a extension of what you've already mentioned, BT, with how you touch base with your friend. I mean, interaction with others who are also going through different practices and sharing our experiences with one another and learning from one another, because none of us are gurus, none of us are masters, none of us are enlightened. So we all benefit by sharing and learning from one another. I think that's an important thing too. Anything else before I wrap up? I want to mention your course to everybody. October 1st. Is that it? Oh, is it October? Yep. It's the first Sunday in October.
The first Sunday in October.
Yes, which may not be the first. I'm looking right here. Yeah. That's the October 2nd is when that course begins.
Yeah, but thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that's Introduction to Spiritual Naturalism, and Lee is a recent graduate of that course. She took the course along with several other students just this last month, and it was fantastic having her as a student. It's awesome. And so basically what the course does is it gives a well-rounded introduction to spiritual naturalism and all its different varieties, which includes secular Buddhism, naturalistic paganism, Christian naturalism, humanistic Judaism, and a whole bunch else. And kind of really knits together all the different kind of topics that we're talking about here, and provides kind of a underlying structure for it. We use some scientific models and theories that are backed by evidence to kind of show how, yep, this isn't just made up. Stuff that we care about as naturalists. That's going to be next fall, and I would love to see you there.
Yeah, we've gotten loads of really positive feedbacks about previous sessions that BT has put on. It's a really great course. I hope you guys check it out. And starts October 2nd, first Sunday of October. And you can go to our website at spiritualnaturalistsociety.org and click on the podcast link, and you can read all about it in detail, and you can register there. So anything else you guys want to say about spiritual practice before we wrap up?
I think we pretty much hit it on the head. About how the main takeaways, if I could put a bow on it, the main takeaways for me is, what's practice? Well, it's both the exercises and trainings that you do in order to make progress toward your goals. And then it's also sort of your life stance and the sense of intentionality and purpose that you take to your integrated lifestyle, and that whole sense of personal growth. And the examples that we've talked about included not only stuff like meditation and ritual, but also the gratitude journal, the meditative art, the running, the talking to significant people in our lives in an intentional way. And all of that is done with a certain intentionality to develop mental habits that are conducive to growth.
Yes, and ultimately happiness.
And ultimately happiness. Happiness both in the sense of sort of like that pleasurable feeling that we call being happy, but also in the sense of a meaningful life, like a happy life.
A deeper, joyful life. Eudaimonia, as the Greeks would say.
Yes.
All right. Do you feel like you covered it pretty well, Lee?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, of course, we could talk forever about this kind of thing, but, in 30 minutes or so, we try to give just a general overview, enough to maybe stimulate some ideas for you, the listener. And also, if you want to comment on our page of this site, you can go to our website, click on the page for this episode, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think and what your own practices are and your own experiences are. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Goodbye.
This program was sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society. Learn more and become a member at spiritualnaturalistsociety.org. Our music was composed by John Clemisrude. Jay Forrest is our technical director. Please share our program and join us next time on Spiritual Naturalism Today.